The time has come to lift the veil. Coombe Ministries presents Unveiling the Threat of Islamic Extremism. Welcome to Session 3, Islam Among Us, Infiltration of the 7 Mountains of Influence. In this session, Kamal Salim and his guest, retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, discuss the 7 mountains of cultural influence in America. They show the ways in which these sectors of influence are being infiltrated by Islamic ideals.
Thank you for being my family.
God bless you.
This discussion here, it's about the 7 mountains of influence. Can you take us through this and see how far they went through all those levels?
Well, that they are invading each of these 7 mountains or these elements of our society, and the objective is to destroy America from within. Now, what's the latest major news network? Al Jazeera. And it's incredible now the viewership that they already have. Al Jazeera, by the way, is a Middle Eastern network, in case you don't know, which has been very critical of America, which has advocated for violent jihad from its stations in the Persian Gulf. And now it is a major network in America, and they already have a very large viewership. And they come across as being very objective. They're not Republicans nor Democrats. They're not conservatives or liberals. They just report the news. And if any of you believe that, I really do want to sell you some oceanfront property in Arizona. Because it's part of the strategy to infiltrate the media and influence your knowledge and influence how you think and how you see things. So they've infiltrated our media, and I don't think that you'll find, with the exception of one network, I don't think you'll find a major network that will ever say anything critical about Islam, because they've essentially been bought and paid for by Persian Gulf petrodollars. And they even, and for those of you who are advocates of and watch Fox carefully, and I appear on Fox, and I like Fox News, so I'm not being critical, but you need to understand that the Saudi royal family owns a major interest in it, even in Fox News. So they've infiltrated every element of the mainstream media. Now, if you're going to get accurate information, you've got to find alternate sources, and there are many alternate sources to find out what's going on. There are a lot of really good blogs and websites and organizations that put out accurate information that kind of give you the rest of the story. So they've infiltrated our education system. It's incredible that we actually have textbooks now that say that Muslims discovered America.
That's right.
And that was obviously reinforced by a President Barack Obama, who talked about the great contributions of Islam in the founding of America. I can't find it anywhere. I'm not a historian, but I love history, and I read it all the time, and I can't find any evidence that there was any Muslim influence in America, other than the fact that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams went and talked to them in England to find out why they were attacking us. So they've infiltrated our education system to confuse our children, so that the next generation has a totally skewed understanding of Islam. Not only what it is, but the effect and influence it has had in the history of our nation. So they're very much in our school systems. And inside the school systems, you now have where you can't have prayer in school, but you can have Islamic studies in grammar school.
That's right.
You can have Muslim appreciation, where we actually have our children dressing up in Muslim garb, adopting Muslims' names, going through the whole ritual of how a Muslim prays. You can do this in the public school system.
Even go to the mosque, to visit the mosque.
And visit a mosque. Now, how many of you saw the YouTube video of when they took school children up in Massachusetts to a mosque? You have to see this on YouTube. As soon as they got in the mosque, the boys were separated from the girls. And the boys were taken over with Muslim men to learn how to pray. and the girls were separated. Of course, in Islam, a woman is only half of a man. So they've infiltrated our school systems, and they're not just influencing our children, they're forcing our children to essentially celebrate Islam. They've influenced our financial systems. Most of you don't know that when we bailed out AIG during the bailouts, that we bailed out the largest purveyor of Sharia-compliant insurance in the world. And Sharia-compliant means that a percentage of the interest on that particular transaction,
2.5%.
2.5% goes to zakat. And zakat is broken down into 8 categories. The category number 7 is actually terrorist. It's those fighting in the cause of Allah. So when we buy something that is Sharia compliant, then what we're doing is we're funding terrorism. In other words, we're funding our own demise, because 2.5% of that is going to go into zakat, and a percentage of that, 1/8 of it, is going to go to the terrorist in America. And the same thing goes for banks that are Sharia compliant. So if you see something that's Sharia compliant, you need to try and stay away from it. They're infiltrating our churches. And when these well-known pastors come up with this concept called Chrislam. How many of you have heard of Chrislam? And it's done under the rubric and the heading of we all worship the same God. No, we don't. Does anybody in here believe that we all worship the same God? The fact of the matter is, when the Muslims come into their mosque and pray, they curse our God. But they say, well, we believe in Jesus. Yeah, you believe Jesus was a prophet. You don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, but we have big name pastors and big churches that have come up with this concept called Chrislam, where they've come together with Islamic congregations and they all worship together, reading from the Quran and reading from the Bible and saying we all worship the same God, and all they're doing is confusing people.
The Muslim Christ, when he comes, he will destroy. He will break the cross, and he will destroy the Christians. He will war against the Christians.
And the Jews.
Of course, the Jews first, and then the Christians. And so therefore, what happened, he will be the anti-Christians and the anti-Jews, which is, something brand new.
Right.
But on the same things, when you said the businesses, we see them that they buy in the stock exchange. They bought over 50% of Oslo, over 50% of the UK, and now they are purchasing the American stock exchange as well. What's their purpose in all this?
Well, if you go back and look at the collapse of the stock market in 2008, and I don't know if you remember that, but there was a run on the stock market, and they took just incredible amounts of money out of the stock market. And the good news was the Congress actually convened and shut it down and stopped the bleeding. But as they went back and did an analysis on that, it was manipulated by somebody to get all this money out of our stock market, which if they hadn't stopped it, it would have collapsed our economy. There's a great book out written by a guy named Kevin Freeman that's called Secret Weapon, that talks about this and the ability of these people, more importantly, their willingness to be able to destroy our stock markets in order to destroy our economy and thereby destroy our society.
Well, how about the movies that they do in the life of Muhammad? Islam, a peaceful religion. All these they put in through the PBS, through the public TV, and through other TV stations, and through History Channel, through the Geography Channel. We've seen all those programs. And then they now established their power in the Gallup reporting. So the Gallup reporting is no longer credible because it's swayed toward Islam.
Right.
And, the only one you can go to is the Pew. The Pew is the only one still clear and free. Now the director of the Gallup is a radical Muslim woman, that she is controlling this. And they're using Women Front to say, we don't treat women bad.
Right.
So to infiltrate our civilization. But nevertheless,
well, I think the greatest infiltration, the one we need to be most concerned about, is actually the infiltration of our government. And our government is heavily infiltrated. Our Congress is infiltrated. Our executive branch is infiltrated. And none of our 9 justices right now in the Supreme Court are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. But there are elements in everything else in the executive branch and the legislative branch that are very much associated with the Muslim Brotherhood.
Tell us about Robert Mueller, what he did.
Robert Mueller, the FBI director, was contacted by the Islamic Society of North America and 2 other groups in late 2011. So on the 8th of February 2012, he met with them, and they complained about the curriculum that was being used to train FBI agents to recognize and deal with Islamic terrorists. And they said, we want to see the curriculum. We want to see what you're training, and we want to see who's doing the training. So they sat down with Mueller's people, and over a period of a couple of days, they expunged 1,000 pages from the training curriculum used by the FBI to train their agents on what to look for, what motivates these Islamic extremists, what's their theology, what's their methodology. Well, someone called me about it, and I actually called Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann and said, Michelle, do you know about this? And she went over immediately and demanded to see what they had taken out of this curriculum in this 1,000 pages that they had removed. And she told me as we met the same day that she went over there, she said, I looked at this stuff and it was right out of the Quran and the Hadith. And she said, when I questioned them and I said, why did you take this out? It's out of the Quran and the Hadith. She said there was no answer. There was no answer. So the FBI, federal law enforcement, is not allowed to know who the enemy is. They're not allowed to know what motivates them, what their methodology is, why they're doing what they're doing. So then you look at the Boston bombing there during the marathon, and you ask yourself, why, given that they knew a lot about these Sarnoff brothers, why didn't they do something? Why didn't they stop them? And the answer is because the FBI is not permitted to by the administration, by the Justice Department. They're not even permitted to know who the enemy is. And this is a very dangerous trend. But if you look at the infiltration into our government today, you will find that 2 or 3 of the senior advisors at the Department of Homeland Security are known to have contacts and associations with the Muslim Brotherhood.
Arif Ali Khan.
That's right.
They are making policy, right?
Right.
They're writing policy for the United States of America. Who's training now our FBI, CIA? Who's training our military forces now?
Well, the trainers, when they expunged all these things, the 2 trainers that were training this were friends of ours, people that we're associated with.
That's right.
John Guandolo and Steve Coughlin, good trainers. They really know this stuff. But they are no longer doing that training because part of the deal that Mueller had with them when they expunged those documents from the training curriculum was that the Islamic Society of North America and the Council of American Islamic Relations would choose the trainers in the future. And now they have trainers training on this stuff that have been chosen by the very elements that are here to destroy America. And keep in mind, in case you're not aware of this, in 2008 in Dallas, Texas, there was a trial called the Holy Land Foundation trial. And in that trial, 5 defendants were convicted of 108 counts of raising funds to support terrorism right here in America. They were convicted, and that was good, but that wasn't what was most significant about the trial. What was most significant was that an unindicted co-conspirator list was produced, which for you lawyers, I think you backed me up on this, basically means I've got the evidence on you, but I don't have the resources nor the time to take you to trial right now. So they produced a very long list of unindicted co-conspirators. And what that said was that most of the major Islamic organizations in America, like the Council of American Islamic Relations, the Islamic Society of North America, the Islamic Trust of North America, the Muslim Student Association, now Muslim Student Union, I think you call it.
As well, correct.
Were all fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood. They're still out there operating. Now let me tell you an interesting story. Knowing that they were going to probably be investigated and prosecuted, The Council of American Islamic Relations decided they were going to get rid of all their incriminating documents. So they started taking all their documents and giving them to a young summer intern, a young man that had just converted to Islam. And they gave them to him and said, go destroy these. We don't want the FBI to find these things. What they didn't know was that this young man was actually the son of an Air Force colonel that had retired from the Air Force, was living down in Richmond, Virginia, and this young man was taking these right back to his dad. Well, his dad, a guy named David Gabbets, linked up with an investigative reporter named Paul Sperry in Washington, D.C., and they wrote a book called The Muslim Mafia. They were sued for the book. No publisher in America except one guy, and that's Joseph Farah with WorldNet Daily, would even publish the book. It is their documents as they talk about exactly what they're doing in America, as they talk about how they're doing it, what their intentions are. Their documents, this was not made up, this is their documents, that's exact right. Duplicates of their documents. So this is a very serious situation.
Now we hear about also the electing, people into government, political leadership.
Right.
Just like the senator from, Minnesota and many others. Now
Keith Ellison.
Correct. And then we're seeing, other, the GOP, being infiltrated. Oh. That even the conservative, group is right now, they're infiltrated with Islam, and they have Islamists sitting on the rank of the GOP.
That's right. And it's important to understand that this is both parties. It's not just the Democrats, it's both parties that have been infiltrated by the Muslim Brotherhood. And they're wielding influence, and they can because they have lots of money. Because they have petrodollars that are coming out of Saudi Arabia and UAE and Qatar and Bahrain. They've got a lot of money, so they're able to buy votes. They're able to buy influence with both political parties. They've also infiltrated, other elements of our government as well, and they've infiltrated our military. And today, every PFC on the battlefield in Afghanistan knows exactly who the enemy is and what we're up against. But if you go all the way back to the Pentagon, what you'll find out is they're still roaming around trying to figure out who's our real enemy. And my great frustration in my last 4 years in the Army, as I was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, was getting the Pentagon to come to grips with who the enemy was. But Donald Rumsfeld, God bless him, he made a very important statement about a year ago when he was on CNN with Fareed Zakaria. Fareed Zakaria said, well, Mr. Secretary, did you make any mistakes in the Bush administration with regards to the war on terror? And Rumsfeld said, yes, we did. And you could just see Zakaria, he was so excited. He was going to get some criticism of the Bush administration. And he said, well, what was that, Mr. Secretary? And he said, we failed to identify the enemy because we were afraid that we were going to offend Muslims. That's one of the truest statements I've ever heard made publicly by a politician. Because we ignored the threat. We didn't face up to it. We were afraid we were going to offend somebody. We were afraid we were going to stimulate more terrorist attacks. Let me go back and say, every Muslim in America is not a threat. And many of them, I would say most of them, don't want to be part of jihad, and they don't want to live under Sharia. And they're the very ones we need to take the gospel to. They're the very ones that we need to reach out to and bring the light. But they don't have a voice. They have no voice because the only voice in America is the Muslim Brotherhood. And guess who our government tries to appease? It's not the peaceful Muslim family down the street from you. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. So Louis Gohmert, Republican out of Texas. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but you ought to try to find it on YouTube. He had Robert Mueller in front of the House of Representatives, and he said, tell me about this outreach you have to the Muslims now, to the Muslim community. And Mueller started telling him about how they had thought through all of this, and they were going to reach out to the Muslims and all that. And then Louis said, okay, now tell me about your outreach to the Baptist. He said, well, we don't have one. He said, okay, well, how about the Catholics? How about the outreach to the Catholics? He said, well, we don't have one. Now, there's only one protected religion in America.
That's right. That's right.
There's only one protected religion
Now,
in America.
we hear about the invasion of...
That's Islam.
We hear about the invasion of our public schools with the curriculum that is written to all public schools and who dominate writing the curriculum, and how they going about it, General?
Well, they're rewriting the textbooks. A very good friend of mine, who many of you would know him if I gave his name, but I won't. But I was speaking at Rick Perry's inauguration a couple of years ago, and I got up and I was talking about this, about the threat, and I said, and it's infiltrated our school system, and our textbooks today have been altered to A, deny our students of the real history of America, and B, to promote Islam. And when I finished and sat down, this guy was emceeing the affair that night as we were preparing for Rick Perry's inauguration. And he got up and he said, well, let me tell you something that you may not be aware of. He said, 20 years ago, we had 12 publishers of textbooks for the public school. Today, we only have 3. And 2 of them are owned by the Saudis. They may still have the name McGraw-Hill, but who owns the corporation?
They bought the name.
They bought the name. So why are we seeing this showing up? Now, I don't know if you've ever watched it, but there's CBN actually did a special with a guy named Eric Stakelbeck. Any of you ever see Eric? Great guy. Listen to his stuff. Eric is extraordinary. He's got a couple of good books out. But he went through and showed the revisions in the history books today that promote Islam and denigrate Christianity. So that you had a textbook, for example, that made one reference to the influence of Christianity and something like 127 references to the influence of Islam in the building of America. That's in a public school system. It's absolutely incredible.
Even in the curriculum, General Jerry, they were just lying about how the Islamic religion came about. They said that Muhammad had an encounter with Allah, which is Muhammad never had an encounter with Allah. They even talked about that, the Christians so says that they have, that Jesus is the Son of God. So says. So they are shifting our children little by little from the understanding of true Christianity and center them right into Islam.
Well, they use, here's another good example of what our children are exposed to. And this just came out, you may have seen this on the news, this came out in Florida, where there was a textbook that talked about the Crusades, and it talked about the Christian occupation of the Holy Lands. And at the same time, it talked about, when it talked about Islam being in the Holy Lands during the Crusades, it talked about their presence in the Holy Land. So think about this, the occupation of the Holy Land versus the presence in the Holy Land. Is that not a pretty strong message to our children? Keep in mind the Crusades came 200 years after the invasion of the Holy Land by the Islamic armies.
They were a response to Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. When Salah ad-Din attacked Jerusalem, they came to take Jerusalem back, from the Islamists.
Right. And now you see also in the textbooks where they talk about the Israelis living in occupied lands, right? In the occupied lands, the lands that are rightfully Palestine, belong to the Palestinians. So our textbooks, our school system is very skewed towards supporting and even celebrating Islam. We've got to stop that. That's why, and I would say this as a sort of an editorial, you have to get people of faith on the school board. You have to go run for the school board. You have to get people of faith in the PTA. You have to start reading the school books.
General Jerry, we hear that Sharia law is equivalent to the American Constitution. We hear that Sharia law is a peaceful method, and we hear that if it become part of the seventh sphere of our influence, then it'll just add, a blessing to this nation.
Right.
So the question is, what is the difference between the Christian Great Commission and the Islamist or the Muslim Great Commission.
This is important to understand. You cannot have Sharia and democracy in a coexistence. They don't work together, because one of the first tenets of Sharia is there can be no man-made laws. When a Muslim talks about freedom, like they did in Tahrir Square in Egypt, and they shove a microphone in some kid's face and say, "Why are you here?" "I want freedom." Well, freedom, as they're talking about it, is freedom from man-made laws, and justice as it is defined by Sharia. We need to understand that the overall objective of Islam, whether you're Sunni or Shia, is the establishment of a global superstate called a caliphate. That's why a real Muslim, a real practicing Muslim, does not recognize the sovereignty of any nation. You may be born in America, but if you're just really a hardcore Muslim, then you don't owe an allegiance. Nadal Hassan told us that, as he testified. His allegiance was not to the Constitution of the U.S., it was to Islam and this superstate, this caliphate that Islam is trying to create. And they have almost created it twice. So you don't have an allegiance to a sovereign state. Your allegiance is to the yet-to-come superstate called the caliphate. And as such, you will do whatever you have to do to help bring about that superstate so that the Messiah will come back and rule over that. The Great Commission was for us to go into all the world, preaching the gospel, making disciples of all nations. But to a Muslim, their Great Commission is to go into all the world, and if you have to, slay the infidels, but bring them under submission. And they have three choices. They can convert to Islam, they can die by the sword, or they can live as second-class citizens and pay the jizya. That's the three choices they have. But regardless of which one, they're going to come under the authority of Islam, and that's their Great Commission.
Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, he said, "Inni umirtu an uqatil al-shu'ub." I have been commanded to fight the people of the world. I have been commanded to war. Therefore, whether you are at war with Islam or not, if you are not a Muslim, your Islam is at war with you. He said, until everyone says, La ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah, until everyone said the first pillar of Islam, which is to declare that Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah and Allah is God of all. And therefore, he said, if they do not accept, then you have rights to their women, to their children, to their monies, to their land, to their everything that they have. So basically, they are your inheritance. Right. So, and the second, part of the Great Commission, he said, the days of Islam will not come about until the Muslim arise. So it's the duty of the Muslim to arise in war. Now, the final question, General. Are the Muslim Brotherhood real? Are they, what is Muslim Brotherhood? Are they for real? Did they really exist, or is that figment of our imagination?
Created in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna in Cairo, 4 years after Kemal Ataturk put an end to the Ottoman Empire as he took over in Turkey. The great hope of creating the Muslim Brotherhood was to recreate the Ottoman Empire, which was the hope of Islam for establishing the caliphate. And in 1938, 10 years after they were created, they only had about 800 members. But a man came along and said, if you'll cooperate with me, I'll give you millions of dollars and you can go global. And the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem said, well, what do I have to do? He said, don't let the Jews come back to this area, to Palestine. The man's name was Adolf Hitler. He gave them millions of dollars for cooperating with him, and they became a global organization.
General Jerry, thank you again.
Okay,
May God bless you.
God bless you, brother.
Thank you for watching this session of Unveiling the Threat of Islamic Extremism. Unveiling was produced by Coom Ministries. The mission of Qum Ministries is to educate the Christian and Jewish communities about the impending dangers of radical Islam and to reach Muslims with the redemptive message of Christ. To learn more about Kamal Salim and the work of Qum Ministries, or to access additional resources concerning Islamic extremism, go to qumministries.com.